keep some decorum around here.
in here, Council. Thank you. So we now move to the next item in public forum, and it is Mr. Barry Coates of Sustainable Initiatives Aotearoa. And Mr. Coates wishes to speak to us in relation to the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which is also the subject of a notice of motion. Thank you. Good morning. Welcome, Mr. Coates.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'll try to keep my remarks relatively brief. I come here as a representative of the It's Our Future Coalition, which is a coalition of citizens from all walks of life who are concerned about the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. I was previously the Chief Executive of Oxfam New Zealand and have worked on trade and investment issues for 20 years. I wanted to, if we can go to the next slide, thank you. I wanted to just set a little bit of context. Firstly, thank you. Firstly, the issue is not new to this council. There was a resolution in December 2012. The council passed a resolution expressing some concerns about the TPPA agreement. These, however, weren't taken on board, and we face a situation now where there has been an initialing of an agreement, but many of the details, and particularly those affecting local government, are yet unclear. So what we do know on this slide is savings from the tariff reductions are relatively modest. It's 0.01% of exports to the countries that we negotiated with. Most of the agreement, however, isn't about trade, as we think of trade. It's about investment, government procurement, patents, copyright, e-commerce and internet, state-owned enterprises, supply chains, competition, finance, regulatory coherence. And many of these issues are absolutely central to the functions of local government. The TPPA aims to remove non-tariff barriers, but in doing so it imposes conditions on local government's powers to regulate commercial activity. And that's, I think, at the nub of concerns about this agreement. What's also of widespread public concern is that foreign corporations can challenge government regulations or decisions. I should say the details are still secret and there hasn't yet been any objective analysis. So the questions that the Auckland Council may have is what additional costs might this agreement incur? For a start, there's additional cost for copyright extension from 50 years to 70 years that will be incurred by libraries and universities and other bodies. But there are also other costs as well. There are the legal costs for ensuring that decisions of the Council would not contravene the treaty, and those costs may be quite significant because they reach into a wide range of decision making. There's a concern that what would happen if the Auckland Council is sued under the terms of the agreement. Investors can take cases against government decisions. That includes local government decisions. So what would happen in the case of this council being sued by a foreign company that considered that measures were contrary to the agreement? The cost of defending these cases has been estimated to exceed $10 million New Zealand per case, and under current legislation and other agreements, those costs are not recoverable. So even defending a case is extremely expensive, let alone the costs of the judgment itself. So there are also restrictions potentially on contracts, council-controlled organisations, and a range of decisions on bylaws, land use permits and licences, and on the standards and conditions that relate to those. And all of those will be bound under the TPPA agreement. There are concerns that there might be restrictions on commercial activity in protecting the environment, supporting communities, or upholding the Treaty of Waitangi. There are procurement and state-owned enterprise rules which might apply to councils in future. It's unclear as to whether the degree to which they will under the current agreement. There will be restrictions on local economic development activities and impacts on local business, including from patent and copyright laws, which will restrict innovation. So there is a long agenda of issues that the council could wish to know more about under this agreement before it moves to further stages. And the further stages are outlined on this slide, and I'm sorry about the small type of it. This is taken from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade website. We're at stage 1. The text is initialed. So there is a very long way to go. If I could draw attention, by stage 5, we get to domestic legislation passed by Parliament. The timing of this motion, I think, is exactly right, because this is the time that the voice of council needs to be heard in terms of understanding the detail and how this agreement could potentially affect the powers of council and obligations under it. And so that in the framing of domestic regulation, those concerns can be heard. If I could just finish, this issue is obviously of concern to many Aucklanders. 10,000 people marched against this issue in August from all walks of life, doctors, lawyers, economists, people from across the society, and 100,000 people in New Zealand have signed petitions. So it is an issue of very broad public concern. So that's all I have to say. I would ask you to support the motion. I think it's important for the voice of council to be heard. From the December 2012 motion...
Point of order, Mr Chair.
14...
Point of order, Mr Chair.
Yes.
I wonder if the officers made, or you made the submitter aware of the time limit on this?
I think the submitter is aware of the time. He said he's finishing now.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Just to say, as a result of the earlier resolution, 14 councils representing 60% of New Zealand's population have supported this former resolution. So Auckland Council has played a leading role in the past. 8 local boards have recently called on the council to follow up on the earlier resolution, so I certainly hope you do so. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. Thanks for your presentation, Barry. The question might be asked, given that New Zealand is already, it would appear, party to an agreement. What is the point in this council now passing the resolution that I'm putting forward around, putting the information on the table, openness and transparency, given that we're going to get that information later anyway?
Thank you, Councillor Walker. It's by no means clear yet when the information on this agreement will be made available to councils, to LGNZ or the Auckland Council. In the United States, there is a requirement that 30 days within 30 days, the President is required to release details of the agreement. So potentially it may be 30 days until that information about what's actually in the agreement is communicated. And I think that it would be good for the Council to try to accelerate that process so that there can be some analysis prior to parliamentary consideration of this on the implications for local government. If I might point out, the second step, step 2 there, is actually Cabinet approval of the agreement itself. Parliament is not required to vote on it. It is Cabinet approval. Parliament's only role is in framing the supporting legislation. So ideally, it would be good to have local government views before even step 2, which is Cabinet's formal approval of the agreement. So that means that this is, I think, a very good time for Auckland Council to be urging the earliest possible release of the details of the agreement and analysis of the implications for local government.
And just a further question that goes directly to this. So there's really no reason, I'm assuming, why the government could not release the information?
There are issues of agreement between the 12 negotiating parties, but perhaps the government could be representing strongly to those other parties for early release of their negotiating documents.
Thank you. Councillor Casey.
It was through the chair to ask our representatives on Local Government New Zealand if the 14 councils who've passed resolutions against the TPPA have made their views known to local government and how that's proceeding. I'm not sure who those representatives are.
We've got Coro Dickinson from the International Relations Department of Auckland Council here, and maybe we, after this presentation, we'll get Mr. Dickinson. He can come and answer that question.
That would be great. Thank you.
Now, Councillor Anai, you got a question? Thank you.
And that's what I was going to ask.
Okay.
Just a related question through the chair.
Yeah.
If I think Barry said that 6 local boards or eight local boards had passed resolutions.
Yeah.
Can we have that information? That would be helpful.
It's all been sent to us.
I think Mr. Dickinson may be able to give us...
That will be coming as well. Sorry, I can't hear Mr. Chairman because there's some interruptions across the street.
Mr. Dickinson will be able to give you some more information
Great,
on that.
thank you very much.
So are there any other questions?
Well, it's not a
Councillor?
question, Councillor Wood, but I attended the Local Government New Zealand National Council meeting last week where this came up, and I was told very clearly that it is not an issue for local government.
Thank you. Well, thank
So,
you.
can I just ask who said that? Through the chair?
Excuse me,
Oh, look,
local
no,
government.
look, come on.
But
No, I'm
who's-
saying I am
who's-
Auckland's representative
Yeah, I understand
on the
that.
Local
Through the
Government
chair,
New Zealand.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
who said that?
Okay, can you answer the question?
National
as to-
Council of Local Government.
National Council of Local Governments, okay?
Has said that there's
It's
no
Local
issue here for
Government New
local
Zealand.
government.
Local Government New Zealand.
Yeah, is there a minute to that effect that I could see, please?
Well,
Right with you. Have you got that? in
I
mind, Penny?
can't tell you, but we can follow up because Councillor Webster's obviously got that information or had that information discussed at the meeting.
Councillor Wood, I asked particularly because of local board interest and the fact that we had been sent so many of the resolutions from local government. So I decided, with the Deputy Mayor discussing it with me, that I would bring it up at Local Government National Council.
Great, no, I have no problem with that. Is there a minute to that effect?
So there's not, but Councillor Webster
The meeting was only on...
can report back.
I
You
can't
can
hear,
report
sorry,
back.
through the
You can
chair.
report
Is there a
back.
minute to that effect, Mr. Chairman?
No, I don't know if there's a minute to that effect.
I
Is there
don't
a
know.
minute? Was there anything on writing or any resolution?
I'm sure I can get one.
Can we have a point of order, please?
Thank you.
We have a presenter here. This is really getting a little bit over the
Well,
top.
okay.
And with the
Okay,
presenter finish,
We'll come back to it.
and
We'll
then
come
we
back to
can
it.
get into our
We'll come
antics
back to it.
later.
No other questions? Okay, well, I'm going to move that we thank the presenter for his Mr. Coates for his presentation.
I'll second that.
And seconded by Councillor Watson. I will put that motion that we thank Barry Coates of Sustainable Initiatives Aotearoa for his presentation on the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. Those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declare that carried. Thank you very much, Mr. Coates.
Mr. Chair, if I could just call the committee's attention, I presented this on behalf of the It's Our Future coalition, so if that could be institutional affiliation changed to that, that would be useful.
Okay, we'll
Thank
note
you.
that in a minute. Thank you.
Excuse me, Councillor Wood.
Yeah.
Barbara had some of the local board resolutions, which she's passed over to Councillor Casey for her information. So that's been actioned.
So maybe seeing it's been raised, Mr. Dickinson may come forward and just give us some advice on those two questions. I think it's what the process is from now on, and what's happening.
Thank you, Chair, and Morena and kia ora tātou, Koro Dickinson aho. If those that are not familiar with who I am, I'm one of the advisors in the Council's Global Partnerships and Strategy team. For my previous experience before I joined the Council a little over 12 months ago, I was one of the negotiators on the New Zealand team for the TPP. So I'm more than happy to ask some factual-based questions based on the knowledge in my head and what has been released over the last couple of days. Barry Coates has outlined very clearly what the next steps are in terms of New Zealand's domestic and parliamentary processes, and those are very, very clear. Over the next 30 days, the US has its own procedures whereby they need to consult with Congress and the Senate. And in New Zealand, we have a parliamentary domestic process that we go through. So one of the key documents that will come out over the next maybe to 30 to 60 days is what is called a national interest assessment, which actually outlines very clearly what are some of the opportunities, obligations to New Zealand because of the agreement that it has signed up to. So what we have now, of 2 days ago, we had negotiations that have been concluded and initialed, as Mr Coates has outlined. So there is a domestic parliamentary process that needs to be completed before New Zealand signs up to it. I think we need to bear in mind that there are 12 countries involved, so they all need to go through their own domestic parliamentary processes to assess and determine whether or not the TPP is in their own best interests. And based on my own experience, I think, and as a founding partner of the P4, which was a predecessor to the TPP, I don't think New Zealand would have entered into TPP if they didn't think it was of the national interest of New Zealand economy and New Zealanders. But we'll have an opportunity as New Zealanders to have a look at the national interest assessment over the next couple of months. And there's a really useful and very, very informative website that's been established by MFAT. It's at tpp.mfat.govt.nz, and there's a plethora of useful and factual and very easily digestible facts of information about the TPP. It's a very broad agreement. It's over 30 chapters, and as Mr Coates pointed out, it covers a plethora of non-tariff and non-trade issues. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions based on the information that has been released following the negotiations, but I do encourage you all to go to that website and have a look through what the information is there. It's very, very factually based and very, very useful and informative.
Thank you. Questions? Deputy Mayor. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. And thank you for that. That's really useful because I think it is one of those issues that is exceedingly polarising, and somewhere in the middle, I think, is the information that people are seeking. So my question is, as part of the next 2 months of looking at the text and the implications of this process, when I look at the recommendations or the notice of motion, the recommendation that we passed was that we simply ask for the local government implications to be understood. I think my understanding is that this isn't the throwing it open to everybody to sort of pick this thing apart. Our focus is local government is focusing on the implications for the council. Is that possible in the 2 months ahead?
I think there's a commitment on the part of central government to, there to be a transparent process, and I think while we could argue around whether or not there has been as much transparency as we would have liked over the last 5 years, there's an opportunity now for us to have a look at the details when the text is finally released, and also to give our feedback on the national interest assessment, and there's various avenues to do that. It will go to the relevant select committee, and whereby New Zealanders or the council is able to present its views on the TPP and what it may mean for Auckland, or at least ask for clarity about what it might mean for Auckland in terms of obligations or opportunities for Auckland.
Yeah, thanks, Carl.
Can I just clarify that? Is that the diagram that Mr Coates presented, this diagram here, is that a diagram that you're familiar with?
I'm not familiar with that, but I'm assuming that it is, based on my knowledge, quite a clear encapsulation of what the next steps are. I think it's important to note that the parliamentary and their domestic processes do include some changes to central government legislation, and the implementation of the FTA is what we've been provided with over the last 2 days, is around 2 years. So it may come into entry into force on the 1st of January 2017 or 2018. But between then and there's the opportunity for the government to change some of the legislation to incorporate some of the obligations that central government may have. And it's very unclear at this point what any obligations, if any, there might be on local government.
Thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Yeah, just following up on the answer that you gave to the Deputy Mayor, where my understanding that is that you did indicate that there is the possibility of the council engaging with the government over the TPPA. That's my understanding.
That's correct, and we have a very good working relationship with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs offices here in Auckland and Wellington.
So I understand that. It follows then that if this government is interested in, if this council is interested in engagement with the government over this issue, that it's desirable for the council to make a decision that gives us the opportunity to engage. And I'm looking particularly at the resolutions that will be coming before the council later in the meeting, and I would suggest that those resolutions do give this council the opportunity to engage in that process.
And that's our
Well, as Mr Dickinson has said, he believes that there will be a process in place, but it hasn't been advised at this stage as to how that's going to happen. So it's something which we just have to wait for the process to evolve. Is that correct?
That is correct. The information that is available at the MFAT website clearly states that the central government is happy and willing for the text to be released at some point in the near future, and those details are being worked out. And there is a domestic process, as we've had for all the other FTAs that New Zealand has entered into. There's a parliamentary process, there's a national interest assessment, so this is no different. There's an opportunity for all New Zealanders to make their views known to the relevant select committee that would, I understand, meet sometime in the near future, maybe in the next 3 months or so.